Hello, welcome to Insights, Newcastle University's public lectures series. My name is Martin Farr, I'm co-chair of the programme. It gives me great pleasure to welcome you to our latest virtual lecture, which is Marcus Ryder speaking on Warm Words Are Not Enough, Repaying the Debt to Our Black Heroes. It's worth saying that Marcus Ryder was named this week as one of the most influential media figures in the UK Black Power List 2022. I'll be back in about half an hour's time after the lecture to field questions and comments from you. You have two ways in which you can pose a question or make a comment. That is on the chat box on our YouTube channel or on Twitter, where our handle is @InsightsNCL, and you can use hashtag InsightsNCL to label your comment. Here to introduce the speaker is Professor Reverend Keith Magee, Chair and Professor of Practice of Social Justice here at Newcastle.
Hello. I'm Keith Magee, Chair and Professor of Practice in Social Justice in our School of History, Classics, and Archaeology. Welcome to the 2021 Black History Month Insight Public Lecture with Marcus Ryder, MBE. The observance of Black History Month originated in the United States in 1926, when historian Carter G. Woodson and the Association for the Study of Negro Life and History announced the second week of February to be Negro History Week. Since that time, from Canada to Ireland to the United Kingdom, for a month long, February in the United States and Canada, October in Ireland, and here in the United Kingdom, the lives and legacies of Black people around the world are lifted up in celebration. Here in the United Kingdom, since October 1987, which was also coincidentally the 150th anniversary of the Caribbean emancipation, the 100th anniversary of the birth of Marcus Garvey, and the 25th anniversary of the Organization of African Unity, Black History Month has been commemorated. Tonight, here at Newcastle University, we gather to celebrate and honor the contributions of Black people in this vein. We are honored to have our celebratory speaker and lecturer, Marcus Ryder, who will share with us that words are not enough, repaying the debt to our Black heroes. Marcus Ryder is the head of external consultancies at the Sir Lenny Henry Centre for Media Diversity, which he set up to increase diversity across the industry. He is also the chair of RADA, Britain's leading dramatic arts academy. He is the author of Access All Areas, the Diversity Manifesto for TV and Beyond with Lenny Henry, and recently edited Black British Lives Matter, a collection of essays on the importance of Black people in the United Kingdom that is scheduled to be released next month, November the 18th. I am certain that you will enjoy tonight's lecture. Welcome.
Hello. May I first say a heartfelt thank you for being invited to talk today, and a happy Black History Month to everyone. I want to start by saying a little about myself. I'm Marcus Ryder. I'm the chair of RADA, Britain's leading Academy of Dramatic Arts. I'm also the head of external consultancies at the Sir Lenny Henry Centre for Media Diversity. I also write on the issues of race and racism in Britain. New book coming out 18th of November. And lastly, I have worked in the UK media for over 25 years, 8 years as a senior BBC News executive. It has been a long journey, and importantly, that journey has informed how I see the world and what I'm going to talk to you about today. So let's go back in time to when I was still at school. When I was 15, I saw an advert in the Voice newspaper for a week-long film and video course for young Black people. You had to apply and even attend an interview to be accepted on the course, held during the Easter holidays. I applied and was successful. Every day, a different person would come and teach us the basics of film production. I didn't realize it then, but each one of the people that was teaching me was a legend of Black cinema. Menelik Shabazz the director of the seminal film, Burning an Illusion, taught us about a director's eye and what that meant. Glenn Ujebe, who directed We Are the Elephant, one of the best films ever made about the struggle against apartheid by South African students, taught us how to write commentary for documentaries. Dennis Davis, who later went on to direct Omega Rising, Women in Rastafari, taught us how to use a camera. And the fact that the first camera person I ever met was a Black woman had a lasting effect on me on how I viewed the profession and breaking down stereotypes, and specifically gender stereotypes, before they even formed. On the last day of the course, when we were cutting our self-shot little films, Dennis Davis approached me and asked if I would like to spend the summer helping the Chedo Film Collective. The Chedo Film Collective was working on a new film called Time and Judgment. I'd only be making coffee and at best syncing up rushes, but in my spare time, I could mess around on the videotape, the VT tape edit machines. It ended up being a summer that would change my life. It gave me a love for film and shaped my career to this day. I tell this story because I recognize that I owe these people a massive debt. Now, I'm not describing the normal narrative that you often hear of the mentor who inspires you and guides you to greatness, a la Dead Poet Society. I'm talking about a debt far more important and so large that I think about it constantly as to how I can actually repay it. Every Black person working in TV and film today owe these people and other people like them a massive debt. These people paved the way to make everything we do possible. They were role models, they were mold breakers, race champions, and revolutionaries. All our careers are in some form or other, whether we know it or not, are built because they broke down barriers. They cleared paths for us to tread. Now, I would like to take this opportunity to talk about one of the names I just mentioned, Menelik Shabazz. Some of you might have heard of him before. He died this year. Now, why is Menelik Shabazz so important? We often talk about the quote unquote Windrush generation as paving the way for the modern Black presence in the UK. Now, as important as this generation is, I believe there is an equally important generation, and that is the first generation of Black Britons born here. This is the first generation that was either born in the UK or came over here at such an early age that Britain was the only place they ever really knew as home. While immigrants invariably fight discrimination and hardship, it is often not until the next generation call a place home, because they literally have no alternative, that the fight for true equality goes to the next level. This generation is no longer the Caribbeans with the grip on top of the cupboard. I'm assuming people know what grip is, like a suitcase. But they no longer have the grip on top of the suitcase, on top of the cupboard, because they constantly had one eye on going back home. This generation who were born here, they not only fought to end racism, but they demanded equality. Because if you cannot be equal in your own home, where can you be equal? This is the generation that truly started to forge what it meant to be Black British, as opposed to Caribbean living in the UK. This is the generation that created the foundations of Black British culture, from Lovers Rock in the 1970s to Soul in the 1980s. Menelik was a giant of this generation who shaped Black British film and culture, but more on the word giant later. Let's hold that word. I'm going to be coming back to it. Menelik Shabazz was born in Barbados in 1954 and came to the UK at the age of 6. In 1974, he enrolled at the London International Film School, 2 years before Pressure, a film which everybody needs to see, 2 years before Pressure, the first film by a Black British director, was released. He was a pioneer in recognizing the importance of the first generation of modern Black Britons who truly called the UK home. In 1976, he directed Step Forward Youth, a 30-minute documentary about London-born Black youth. And in 1978, he directed Breaking Point, which tackles the issues of systemic criminalization of Black British youth and the police use of the sus law, a version of today's stop and search. Menelik Shabazz, however, is probably best known for his first feature film, Burning an Illusion, about a Black British woman in London, again focusing on the first generation of Black British people born in the UK. The film won the Grand Prix at the Amiens International Film Festival. Sorry for my mangling of the French there. And in 2011, it was honored with a Screen Nation Classic Film Award. The importance of the Black British community ran through his life and not just his films, as he co-founded Kumba Productions to provide an outlet for independent film projects in 1982. And in 1984, he went on to co-found Chedo, which I mentioned earlier. Chedo was a seminal Black British film collective. It was Chedo, after Dennis invited me to work there, that I had the privilege of seeing Menelik work close up. You know, as I worked on the docudrama Time and Judgment, again, trying to put the Black British experience and the diaspora into an international diasporic context, right? It was far from I was far from the only young Black person working at Chedo, and Chedo gave pivotal training and was a bedrock for so many people I meet today, so many Black people I meet today had a foundation by working at Chedo. In Chedo, Shabazz clearly placed the Black British experience within a global context. All the films I mentioned earlier, from Omega Rising to We Are the Elephant, came out of this film collective. Menelik Shabazz continued his groundbreaking work of framing Black British film in an international context as he launched the Black Filmmaker magazine, BFM, in 1998, the first Black film publication aimed at the global Black filmmaking industry. Menelik Shabazz was a pioneer who saw the importance of shaping and capturing the narratives of the Black British experience, and were the first people to recognize its importance, first to Britain, but more importantly, globally. And like I said, in 2021, he died aged only, I think, 66. Now, following his death, nearly every major national newspaper ran tributes to him, and numerous cultural commentators acknowledged the importance of his work to British cinema in general and Black British culture specifically. I cannot stress enough what an inspiration he was to me, and he is already sorely missed by every Black British person working in film. However, while I listed his achievements, his list of setbacks would be equally long. As a Black person, we encounter invariably more setbacks than achievements. Our achievements and what we achieve are because we have gone through more setbacks. Before his death, he labored for years unappreciated and overlooked by film commissioners and television executives and the mainstream establishment. The question I want to put to you is, what is the right way to honor the many heroes we have like Menelik Shabazz? And most importantly, how do we honor them before their death? Now, as you all know, it is October. October is Black History Month. And every year, we often hear moving speeches and read pieces written by Black British people and others talking about the fact that they are, quote unquote, standing on the shoulders of giants. You must have heard the phrase, standing on the shoulders of giants. It is a phrase we hear time and time again. And it is a way of acknowledging the great Black figures that have come before us. These speeches and written pieces are often highly personal, and I must confess, I do sometimes get emotional thinking about the Black British people and the struggles that they've had, or the people who came before me, came before us. In many ways, it's the very purpose of Black History Month, to acknowledge and unearth and celebrate the Black history and historical figures that are too often overlooked and ignored. I recently edited the book with Black British Lives Matter with Sir Lenny Henry. It's a collection of essays with great Black British figures on the importance of Black British representation in every walk of life and parts of society. There are contributions by Doreen Lawrence, the architect David Adjaye, writing about why Black British architects matter, the writer Kit Duval, writing about why Black British writers matter, and Kwame Kwei-Armah, for example, just to name a few. Kwame talks about why Black British artists matter. But I want to quote two short extracts by the historian David Olusoga, who's in the essay Why Black British Historians Matter, which I think are relevant today. He says, Black British historians matter because we are the people who uncover the lost lives and lost histories that were deliberately concealed. And we are showing the chapters of British history, the chapters of British history that are relevant to all of us. He also says, the job of Black British historians at this moment is to fight against the deep and deliberate toxification of ideas and phrases that are in fact beneficial to us. I want us to look at some of those phrases. Now, he was talking about in the context of Black Lives Matter has come under criticism and is being seen as a radical phrase. And he pushes very hard against that, feels that it's a statement of fact. Of course, Black Lives Matter. But I want to look at that phrase, standing on the shoulders of giants. Now, I'm not going to try and argue that it's a phrase that is toxic to Black people, but I think it's important we look at our phrases. I will argue that I think there are serious problems in using the phrase when it comes to understanding Black history and honouring our heroes. Now, previously, I've used the phrase myself, and I even wrote an open source blog post titled Standing on the Shoulders of Giants. The open source document enabled people who work in film and television to add the names and profiles of quote unquote giants in the media industry, giants of colour in the media industry that have gone before them. So I've used the phrase. However, I've become increasingly uncomfortable with the phrase, and in many ways, I do not think it does justice to the people who paved the way. Most importantly, it does not adequately recognise the sacrifices so many people made to enable us to be where we are today. Let me explain why. First of all, it is important to understand where the phrase comes from. It is thought it can be traced back to the 12th century and was first used by the French philosopher Bernard of Chartres, describing how philosophers see further by building on the philosophical works of those that preceded them. Again, please excuse my mangling of the French. Right? The phrase gained popularity in England when the noted scientist Isaac Newton wrote in 1675, "If I have seen further, it is by standing on the shoulders of giants." Right? So it comes from has a very European ancestry in the phrase and the thinking behind it. Now, this is important. When Isaac Newton used the phrase, he was referring to scientists and thinkers who had gone before him, and he was merely adding to their achievements. Importantly, the scientists that went before Newton were, for the most part, celebrated and recognized for their contribution to science when they were alive. They were giants of their time and recognized as such. This is in marked contrast to the first quote of David Olusoga, that our heroes are often not recognized and their presence is deliberately obscured. It is for this reason I do not think the shoulders of giants metaphor adequately describes contemporary Black achievement and contemporary Black heroes. The metaphor is describing the image of someone who is standing tall. And I am merely adding to and building upon their achievements. The metaphor airbrushes the history of the heroes who have enabled me to be where I am today. It airbrushes away their struggles. For the most part, they are not happily standing tall. To use David's metaphor, at best, they are half hidden. So what is the right metaphor? Instead of saying we are standing on the shoulder of giants, we are all too frequently, in my view, standing in the battlefield of fallen warriors and the walking wounded who have sacrificed their careers, often their health, sometimes mental health, families, to enable us to be where we are today. The people who came before us might be giants, but we're not standing on their shoulders. We are benefiting from the foes they have slain and the fights they have waged on our behalf. A few years ago, a Black woman corrected me when I congratulated her for breaking the glass ceiling. She said quite calmly, "Mine was just the final push. The ceiling was weakened by all the women who cracked their skulls on the previous attempts." She did not view herself as standing on the shoulders of giants. For her, she was standing amongst people who had suffered and sacrificed much more than her, and most importantly, had not reaped the benefits. Now, knowing I was going to give this speech, I tried to harness the wisdom of the virtual crowd via Twitter and asked what metaphor would better sum up our relationship with our heroes. Here are a few suggestions that came back, ones that I liked. Forget the trolls. One was, we walk the path cleared by our warriors. Another, they resisted so we could be free. Another, we can speak out now because others before us refused to be silenced. I like that. We can speak because they refused to be silent. One more, being ahead of your time proves how backward the world is. A few more. We benefit from the wars and battles of our predecessors, those who are brave enough to first cut into the long grass. My personal favorite, we're free because of the shed blood by our deceased. And the poet Lemn Sissay, he even contributed. I was shocked. It's always nice when you get a tweet from someone like Lemn Sissay. And his one was, we grow from the garden tended by those who came before us. He actually suggested two. The other one was, we grow from the earth carefully tended by those who came before us. Otherwise, so correct in his language. You'd expect that from a poet, I suppose. So why do our use of correct metaphors matter? Am I just being a pedant, obsessing over whether people are using the right metaphor? And myself, for that matter, just a few years ago, I was using the shoulders of giants up until two years ago. Now, as well as Menelik Shabazz, I want to tell you about another Black hero who is still very much alive, and I think her story will illustrate why this metaphor is so important. So for me, the whole issue took a degree of urgency and went beyond mere semantics when I was made aware of the story of Barbara Blake Hannah, the first Black person to appear on British television in a non-entertainment role back in 1968, landing the job of on-camera reporter for the daily evening news show Today with Eamon Andrews on Thames TV. But after 9 months, she was dismissed, allegedly because her employer came under pressure from viewers who called in daily to say, get rid of that N-word off our screens. Now, she was the pioneer who paved the way for every Black newsreader in the UK who came after her. But in paving the way, her career was sacrificed. And this is where the metaphor becomes important. How we view Blake Hannah is so important. If we see her simply as a giant whose shoulders Black TV journalists stand on, we owe her nothing but gratitude and respect. If, on the other hand, we view her as a fallen soldier who has made sacrifices, which I, for example, as a Black journalist, am benefiting from, then we owe her something far more tangible. She deserves a career. She deserves a career that I am benefiting from. She deserves financial compensation. She deserves something really tangible rather than just my respect. Respect and words are cheap. She definitely deserves our respect. Giants in a white context, operating in a white patriarchal society, as Sir Isaac Newton was describing, are justly compensated while they are alive. They do not need reparations and compensation. But our heroes are hurting. I'm here today because of the Windrush generation that came before me. But I should not think of myself as passively standing on their shoulders. I owe them something far more than that. I have a duty to fight for them, not to be unjustly deported. Marcus Rashford, amazing hero as he is, and everybody loves him, is not just possible because of the great Black footballers who came before him. He is possible because of the great sacrifices the Black footballers made before him. And this is the crux of the issue: sacrifice. Our history and heroes are invariably a story of sacrifice, and we cannot and should not take that sacrifice for granted. Barbara Blake Hannah and Menelik Shabazz might be more visible cases of the sacrifices made by our Black heroes, but we're all subject to racism every day, and many of us have made tremendous personal sacrifices. Some of us have chosen paths which we knew would require sacrifice. Others of us have not been able to avoid the sacrifices and pain we have endured. Sometimes it's hard to tell the difference between the two. Many of our greatest heroes were fully aware of the sacrifices they were making for our benefits. This is possibly best summarized in the Martin Luther King Jr. I Have a Dream speech, where he explicitly said that he might not make it to the promised land. He realized the sacrifices he was making, that he himself might not personally benefit from. And another quote, which I love, of Martin Luther King is, "Freedom has always been an expensive thing. History is fit testimony to the fact that freedom is rarely gained without sacrifice and self-denial." Sacrifice that often benefits future generations. Sacrifice is essential for our progress. History has shown us the importance of our heroes, making personal sacrifice. And so if we want to continue to progress, we must find a way to make that sacrifice easier and less, to encourage others to make that sacrifice, and ultimately ask ourselves, what would I need to make that sacrifice? How can we expect future Martin Luther Kings to make sacrifices if we do not support their widows and fatherless children and support them when they're alive as well? How can we expect future Menelection Bazes to make groundbreaking films documenting our culture if we do not support them when they're not being recognized and being effectively blacklisted by the establishment for their stand? How can we expect future Barbara Blake Hannahs if we do not give an alternative source of income when she is unjustly fired and called an N-word? Because if we simply want to stand on the shoulders of giants and reap the benefits of their sacrifice and not to make that sacrifice ourselves, we will not move forward. Which is why today I'm calling on us all to find ways to give back to the people who have made our lives and our progress possible. Barbara Blake Hannah deserves more than warm words from fellow Black journalists like me. The family of Menelik Shabazz deserves more than a nice obituary column in The Guardian. My fear is, while the argument for reparations due to slavery, I think it's a very important debate, don't get me wrong, but while that argument for reparations due to slavery goes on, we do not need to go back 400 years to find people that deserve our support, right, or justify our support. Many of the white equivalent to our Black heroes would be millionaires, some even billionaires, justly rewarded for their efforts while they were alive, and their families would equally be reaping the benefits. Instead, most of our Black heroes have not only not benefited, they have endured a massive cost for doing what they have done. And this has impacted their families and well-being. Black History Month should not simply be a month where we wrap ourselves in a warm glow of Black achievement, praising our heroes and simply acknowledging that we stand on their shoulders. Black History Month should be us acknowledging the debt that we owe these people in very real terms and trying to find ways in which to repay back the debt. We need to create the environment so people can do great work in the knowledge that they will be supported. We need to build the institutions so this can be done in a structured and organized fashion. Let us support the brothers and sisters. Let us support our great heroes, because they might be giants, but they still need a helping hand. Because we are freer today because of the blood they shed. So this month, maybe the metaphor should be, let us not just remember them, but let us go to the blood bank and make a donation. Thank you.
And we're now live with our speaker, Marcus Ryder. Marcus, welcome to Insights.
Thank you very much.
It's a very timely book, I'm sure you'll agree. Is it very much born of 2020, which struck me as, I mean, it's not an original thought, as being quite a profound year for Black history, both in George Floyd in the US and the reaction here and the Colston statue and the debate on taking the knee and so on. It felt like a big deal.
The title, obviously, Black British Lives Matter, is born of 2020 because Black Lives Matter was the global movement in 2020. But the issue is one which I've been thinking about for a very long time, which is what is Black identity if you strip it away from racism? You know, it's very easy to say that race is a social construct, which it is. But then you quickly just can go down the road that race is then just a reaction, or Blackness is just a reaction to racism. And so it's trying to see, what does Blackness mean? What does it mean to be Black? What is a Black identity, which is a proactive, positive stance, as opposed to framing it in terms of racism, you know? And so that's a debate I've been having and thinking about for years, decades, I would say. And a lot of the documentaries I've made and you know, have been trying to grapple with that issue. And within the book, you see other authors grappling with that issue. So there's David Adjaye, the architect, and he writes Black Architects Matter. And so it's, how does the Black experience, Black British Architects Matter? And so it's, how does that experience translate into architecture? You know, what is the extra dimension, or what is a perspective? As you know, I'm the chair of RADA. And so I sat in on a acting class yesterday, and they were discussing Chekhov. And in that acting class, they were talking about a lot of Chekhov has been interpreted through the male gaze, right? And so that's understandable, and trying to dissect and explore what looking through the male gaze means, and trying to address that. But I wouldn't have been able to get the book, and it would have been too academic. But I said, what is the Black British gaze? And that is partly what we're trying to do with the book. As I said, it wouldn't be as catchy a title, but it's saying what is a Black perspective on things in architecture, in history, on motherhood, because we've got Doreen Lawrence writing about motherhood. So yeah. We can talk about the importance of the events that happened in 2020, but to answer your question directly about the title, the title was born out of the events of last year, but the themes and the ideas of the book, the antecedents is a lot longer.
Were you broadly encouraged by the popular responses to George Floyd's murder and by the demonstrations that took place throughout the year? Did you regard them as encouraging?
So what was quite interesting about the book, for the different authors that we spoke to, was their reaction to it. A lot of them have not watched the video, which was really interesting for me. They're saying they don't go to, when they go to Spain, they don't go to bullfights. So why do they need to, and nor would they watch a video of a bullfight. They don't need to see a Black man being brutalized and killed. Was a common theme on quite a few. And I think it was Anne-Marie Mafiden who wrote about Black Technologists Matter. And her perspective was, if you can only see us as human after you've seen us brutalized, you know, then something is deeply wrong. If Black people need to die in order for Newsnight to cover some of these stories in order for there to be mass protests, something is wrong. So I can understand that perspective. At the same time, I'm really encouraged that when people saw such a something so wrong that people took to the streets, so I think that there is an encouragement, and you see it in the youth, you see it across gender, you see it across races. So in many ways, it would be churlish to not see a positive in it. There's definitely positive to be, I think, to be had from it. But as I said, I also listen to the people who are like, why did it need this? For people to recognize that. So I understand both perspectives.
It was something of a tipping point. We feel it very much in universities in terms of what we teach and how we teach, and questions are being asked of our provision. And there's a very good question arrived from one of our viewers. And if you'd like to ask a question or make a comment, you can do so in the chat box on YouTube or on Twitter. Insights NCL is our handle. Mustak asks, Wales is to become the first UK nation to make the teaching of Black, Asian and minority ethnic histories and experiences mandatory in the school curriculum. Does the rest of the UK need to lead by example?
Yeah, I did not know that about Wales. I am going to Google that, and you can guarantee I'll be tweeting that out in an hour or so. I think that's brilliant. I think it's really important that So when I was at school in the 80s, there was definitely a movement that was gathering pace to make sure that we didn't see history as just a subject for the privilege, so just not looking at the kings and queens of the Tudors and what have you, and so we're looking more at, I can't remember what they call political history. They were calling it, was being brought into schools for O levels and A levels, and it was seeing how history was affecting quote unquote ordinary people. So you actually saw that movement in education, in schools education, on socioeconomic and class issues. And so if we're starting to see it on race, I think that's great. And I think if we start seeing it on disability and start seeing it in other underrepresented groups as well, I think that's a positive.
Mm. But as you say, it's a pity it required for this type of initiative to be taken. Steve asked a question which is not unrelated, which is what should employers be doing to create more diverse workplaces?
Okay, so I think we need to look at the issue of diversity and inclusion. So a lot of companies will look to recruit more diversely, and whether that's ethnically or disability or through gender, but simply increasing the level of melanin will not change the culture. So what you're really looking for, and this is what's so hard, I think, is looking at the power dynamics within companies. And so one of the things which I do, because I consult with companies as part of the Lenny Henry Centre for Media Diversity, is I says, what is looking at headcount diversity, which lots of people do and lots of companies publish that they've got X percentage are from, quote, BAME backgrounds or whatever, or X percentage of staff are women or whatever, as well as publishing the headcount diversity. I think they should publish salary spend percentage, because salary is often a proxy for power. And so you actually start seeing where the power dynamics are in organizations once you see the percentage of salary spend. So I think it's all about power dynamics. And so I would say that one thing that companies should start doing is publishing the salary spend percentage or share.
A closely related question comes from a member of the audience who there's no name. At the start of your talk, you mentioned your placement opportunity and people who inspired you. What barriers exist today and what can be done for young people in these situations?
I don't think that there is a silver bullet. I think it is, so what I have learned working in the media is there are specific bottlenecks. Once you know your industry, there are specific bottlenecks at different places. So for example, there are almost zero black set designers. They're just not there. Mm. Whereas there are quite a few, not employed mind, but quite a few black researchers and assistant producers, you know. And so I think it's really important to identify where those bottlenecks are, because if, for example, you're saying you want to do training, you know, there's no point doing more generalized training, which is if what you need is you need more set designers, for example. Or so other industries will have other bottlenecks. There are specific glass ceilings in the media industry, which I know about, and I can talk about how you can address that specific glass ceiling. I am absolutely certain that there are specific glass ceilings in academia, and people in academia will know, if I'm sure you would, where those specific glass ceilings might be, and they might be different for gender, as the parent penalty kicks in, as women are still disproportionately the child carers, or there might be other places where they kick in for other professions. So I think it's important to be industry specific, and then try and figure out why those bottlenecks are there. For young people, for young people, I think again it's important for us to be industry specific. So, for example, with myself, I was very nervous going into television, and I would still be very nervous if I was advising a young black person going into television not to go into youth programming, or to be careful of that, because there is a real age penalty, because it's black people are seen as young and funky, cool, young and funky. And so they'll say, come in and do the youth programs and you'll be able to tell us what the latest grime is, or you'll be able to tell us, and it's absolutely fine. And they think their career is flying. Then they hit about 30 and they age out, you know, and they get the next 21-year-old and they'll be like, great, your career's flying, and you can now tell us about the next whatever. I don't know what's going to come after grime. I'm far too old to even, you know, I'm even pretending I know what grime is. But yeah, so again, it's about being industry specific. There'll be other things, or for example, if you look at women, you know, they have to avoid, if they're in a newsroom, being pushed into lifestyle and soft news, you know, because then there's nothing wrong in those genres, but they've been far too ghettoized in those areas. And so I think you need to be intersectional, you need to be clever, and you need to be industry specific.
Andy Peters is an exception to the rule, as you put it. The Prime Minister often says that...
But he looks about 12.
No, I hate him. The PM has often described this as the most diverse government in history, with diversity, Chancellor Exchequer, Home Secretary, and so on. Do you feel that there's the political will behind the initiatives you're suggesting that hasn't been there before, or it's still lacking?
I honestly believe that there is a political will to increase diversity, right? And diversity of all kinds. I believe that. I think there is not I think we struggle if we then talk about diversity of values and perspectives, and because And that's kind of precisely what the book is about. It's about the fact that for David Adjaye to be a great architect, he is going to make buildings different from his white counterpart. If he's going to really, fulfill his potential, he's going to make quote unquote black buildings, for want of a better term, and similarly, if somebody's going to be a black person is going to be a great journalist, they will need to be given the latitude to be able to pursue their career looking through the world through a black lens, And I think the issue is whether it's through with the cabinet or any other institution, is ensuring that we're actually making sure that people are able to bring their entire identities, and I hope I'm not betraying any confidence to the group, but earlier we were talking and I believe you've got a book coming out. Can I mention that?
Why not?
Okay. Right. So you have a book coming out about Margaret Thatcher, yeah? And so I think she's a really interesting example as to what did she do with regards to gender diversity. She's as far as I'm aware, she's the first woman prime minister of a major developed country, maybe.
Golda Meir, Israel, possibly, but yes. Yeah.
Okay. And so, as such, there is no denying that she broke some glass ceilings, But then, in terms of what did she do, and so there's no denying that we have a diverse cabinet, But it's not as. But what Margaret Thatcher proves is that there's not a simple equation of representation means, or let me put it another way, that having a woman in even the top position equals better representation of views and opinions and the concerns of women, or of all women, you need to have a critical mass, So it's a debate that's been raging for years on gender with regards to Thatcher, and I think we're only just starting to really have that debate with regards to race now.
Curiously enough, it was thought that she was proud of being the first scientist prime minister and the first woman prime minister. It wasn't really a big issue for her. Some interesting questions from our audience. Jessica asks, why do you feel it's important to have role models and mentors?
So I think it's important to have role models in order for people to understand. Too often we are having to invent our career paths ourselves as we go along. And it's just too difficult is the bottom line, So I think it's really important to try and, if we're trying to navigate, and, I'm talking about academia, if you're trying to navigate your career through academia and you don't have a path to follow or know somebody who can help you navigate that path, it's just too difficult. In any profession, in television, in journalism, for the vast majority of us, there'll be a few exceptions, but for the vast majority of us. So having mentors and role models who you can understand that, and I think that's why it's also useful to have mentors that look like you, or have similar experiences and challenges to you. So while for a Black person, a white mentor might on paper seem useful, and often is, the difficulty sometimes is you might be facing a challenge that the white person hasn't faced. And so a lot of work on this, even though we're talking about race and it's Black History Month, there's been far more academic work that's done on this with regards to gender. And so it's the idea that if the woman has a male mentor, the male mentor will say, okay, here's what you do when you go into the meeting. You need to assert yourself. You need to do this, you need to do that. And the woman's thinking to herself, if I do that, I'll be seen as this type of person. And it might work for the man, but I know it's not. Those kind of tools are not tools that are gonna work for me, you know. And so I said a lot of this has been done with regards to gender, but I would suspect that it's true with regards to race as well. In the advice that might be pertinent and useful and have served one ethnic group well, because of systemic racism and other perceptions and blah blah blah, might not serve the black man or the black woman as well. So while mentors are useful, I think it's also really useful to have mentors of the same race and gender and intersectional identities as well.
Mm-hmm. Tim would like some information, please. Really interesting to hear about Menelik Shabazz. As someone new to his film portfolio, what would you recommend watching as a starting point?
I actually like Time and Judgment. So I would, watch Time and Judgment, but I think a lot of the films that Chedo, so it's really interesting. You basically in the 80s had two black film collectors. You had Chedo and you had Black Audio, Black Audio Collective, Black Audio. And you know, for them, they were coming far more from an arts school background. And so you had Looking for Langston. So those are some really interesting films. I can't believe the name's gone clean out of my head. Whereas you had Chedo, which seemed to come far more from a kind of Pan-Africanist perspective. So I'd actually think about watching films from both groups, and I'll try and remember. Black.
It'll come to you as soon as we go off air. It'll come to you.
Yeah, no, it will come to me. But Google Looking for Langston. It's a brilliant film.
We're overrunning slightly, but that's a good sign because of the wonderful questions we're getting. And I'll round up by linking three questions together, if I may, on the subject of teaching. The first is from Mark, who asks, what does Black History Month mean to you?
Black History, that I'm grappling with, as it's given from, as I gave in my lecture. You know, Black History Month does mean recognizing history and what have you, but I'm beginning to wonder, should we be thinking of it in the same way we think of Remembrance Sunday? You know, in that we can't, if in Remembrance Sunday, we give to charity. We think that we support people who have sacrificed and are continuing to make sacrifices for us. So I am grappling with that, whether it's just about remembering our heroes or whether it's about actually supporting our heroes.
Question we have from Shilpi, who asks, when it comes to diversifying school history curricula, what would you suggest to avoid teaching a victim narrative of BAME history?
So David Olusoga has a chapter in the book called Black British Historians Matter. And what he says is that it's about it's not about Black history per se, as if you're going to learn about one Black hero or this Black hero. It's about the way that you view the world. And so he gives the example of, so he's got relatives in Scotland. And, he goes to Scotland and he looks at, he eats the toffee there, or the fudge there rather. And it's about the fact that Scotland had massive sugar plantations in the Caribbean. And so there were massive links to sugar. He listens to Bob Marley, and it's not about knowing that Bob Marley is a hero, which is the kind of thing that you hear in Black History Month. It's about the fact that you have Bob Marley, Peter Tosh, God, I can't remember the other Wailers, but they all have Scottish names. right? And so it's about teaching history so that when you think of Scotland, you realize those black links. So it's not, you think of Burns, Burns was going to go to Scotland. It's whether, is it a coincidence, and this is a genuine question, that St Andrew's flag, for Scotland is the same as the Jamaican flag. Now, I honestly don't know if that's a coincidence, but the Scottish links for Jamaica are multiple. So it's not about teaching about doing a special class, having history and then doing a special class on Bob Marley. It's not about having a special class on sugar. It's about recognizing. And so I think, talking to Lenny Henry, he obviously is from the Midlands originally, and he tells the story of the Black Country flag, in the Black Country, the Midlands or whatever, having chains, right? And because there was a steel producing area that he was in. I can't remember exactly where it was, but it was maybe it was Sheffield. Well, Sheffield isn't Midlands, but yeah, it was about steel producing place and chains being on that flag. And he was doing an opening ceremony and he looked at the flag and he was like, that's actually the steel that was used to shackle my people. And they made a lot of money through slavery selling those shackles. And that's when you then see it differently. That doesn't mean that, you do a kind of Colston and want to throw the flag in the canal. But it's just constantly the way you view the world, the different links you make. So that's how you avoid the victim narrative, because it's not about victims. It's just about knowing that history, knowing those links.
And the very final question, it's a wonderful question to conclude, comes from Christine, who asks, you mentioned the chapters of Black history that matter to all of us. In a decade's time, and looking back on the early 2020s, what would today's chapter or narrative be?
Having spoken to historians, they always say that you shouldn't try and do that. I'm not a historian, but they always say you shouldn't try and do that. And, there's the famous Mao Zedong quote, which is when questioned about the French Revolution and, whether he thought it was a success. And, he says, 200 years afterwards, he goes, it's too early to say, So I think I'll dodge that question. And it's like, it is far too early to say what we'll say about in 20 years' time. The things that we think are going to be massively significant invariably aren't. The things that we think will be a flash in the pan have ripple effects that could be absolutely gigantic. So yeah, I'm dodging that question.
If I may say so, I think the historian of the 2020s will be using your book as an important primary source. So thank you very much for being with us today, Marcus Ryder.
Thank you so much. It's been a pleasure.
Thanks for watching. Marcus' new book, Black British Lives Matter, is available to pre-order from our university bookseller Blackwell's via the link in the description below. If you've enjoyed tonight's event, you may also be interested in other events marking Black History Month. A special Black History Month episode of the From the Newcastle podcast will be released on Monday, the 25th of October. Search From Newcastle on your favourite podcast platforms. And Newcastle University are hosting the 2021 Black Britain and Beyond Symposium this November. Details are available in the description, also on YouTube. Our next Insights virtual lecture will be on Tuesday, the 26th of October, and it will be Dr. Teresa Williamson speaking on the subject of rethinking the future of housing worldwide, favelas as a sustainable model. We hope you can join us then.